Okay, let's take a look at the television set because everybody loves CRT demonstrations. Here we have our 1 1/4 inch by 1 inch neodymium in 45 Gauss. Here we have our grid pattern being projected from the wall to our CRT, cathode ray tube, which everybody thinks there's an electron gun in the back of that. Well, you can call it an electron gun if you want, but what they are is snapping, breaking dielectric lines of force activating the phosphorus field on the front of the screen. Even the quote-unquote inventor, discoverer of the electron, J.J. Thomson, refused for many years, you can read his biography, nobody reads this stuff, refused to admit that electrons were particles. He was eventually persuaded by several Royal British Societies, one on electricity, and to eventually confess with great herald that the back of a CRT was the projection of particles, electrons. Well, they're not. They're snapping dielectric lines of force. Tesla said this. Faraday said this. Charles Proteus Steinmetz said this. It was ridiculous. Oliver Heaviside, who gave you everything that you're watching now, running your computers on, your AC, electrical grid, he called it a psychosis. Anyway, let's take a look at our magnet and see what we're taking a look at. Anyway, we're going to look at the dielectric inertial plane first. Okay, why are we getting this egg-shaped pattern? And you'll notice that the egg-shaped pattern is focused over here and is bulged out over here. So now let's flip it on the other side. You'll notice it'll be reversed. So what are we getting here? First, let's notice our centrifugal divergence, correct? Centripetal convergence. Same thing here. Here is our interior, midpoint, dielectricity, convergence, reintegration, convergence. So, why do we get our egg-shaped pattern here and here? Well, let's take a look at that in a second. But now we know that dielectricity is repulsed by magnetism. So now we have to ask the question, why do we get this pattern? You say, well, that's because it's the center of your CRT tube. No, well, you can get the same pattern over here, although you got greater deflection because the quote-unquote electron gun, which is all it is doing, is snapping dielectric lines of force. The front of the phosphorus screen is located obviously right here at the back of the CRT tube. Why do we see this white spot right here? And let's take it to the center. If you get it really close, let's notice we have a white bluish ring, a black ring, a white ring, right at the center, a really bright spot. Can anybody explain that? No, you can't, because you're taught that they're electrons shooting out of the back of this cathode ray tube. Well, they're not. They're snapping dielectric lines of force. If I have 1,000,000 rubber bands nailed to the floor and I pull them back as far as they go and let them snap or bring them to the point of breaking, that is not the snapping or the discharging of particles. That's dielectric lines of force discharging to the front of this cathode ray tube. So why is there a bright spot here, and why do we have concentric rings of black and white on this video? Why do I get warpage counterclockwise on our grid pattern here, and I flip it over and I get clockwise warping of our grid pattern here, and yet a counterclockwise void here? Now, let's work off the premise of what Tesla said. I recently found a quote from November 1928 when it's from The Old Scientist. I can give you the quote. I'll actually post it in the video. I said, we interviewed Mr. Tesla and he had some odd views. It seems he doesn't agree with the current scientific belief. November 1928 article from The Old Scientist, I believe is the article. He doesn't believe that that there is such a thing as an electron particle. Anyway, I'll give you the quote. But Oliver Heaviside called this a psychosis. The quote-unquote discoverer of the electron denied for years and years until he was persuaded by extreme fame and acclaim to eventually admit to what he did not want to admit to, J.J. Thomson, that the electron was a particle. It is not. It's a dielectric snapping discharge line of force, ether modality in discharge. There's no such thing. You notice when you turn your TV set on, you get this great little nice electrostatic field right up here. Well, that's coincidence. No, it's not due to electrons. This is a dielectric vacuum tube, correct? Okay. So now, we have to answer the question, why is there a bright spot here and yet it's completely void out here? And you notice we're getting clockwise and counterclockwise spin from our magnetism. So we know that what is happening when it's shooting at the back of this cathode ray tube, it's not an electron gun. What's happening is snapping dielectric lines of force to the front of our phosphorus screen. So, we know that magnetism displaces dielectricity. We know that fact. That's an absolute fact. Even the most heretical fools of science will admit that fact, that magnetism displaces dielectricity. So let's turn it on to our... You have to reset this every 12 minutes or so. So why do we get displacement around the magnet, and yet the center part is completely bright? Can you answer the question? Yes, that is because this is the centripetal point of convergence. Dielectricity attracts electricity. Magnetism attracts nothing. It only displaces. You see this black void? This is magnetism displacing. The only reason there's a whitish glow around this blackish void and another black void and then another white glow. And right at the center, you can see we have an extremely bright spot. Correct? This is the centripetal point. Dielectricity attracts dielectricity. Dielectricity is centripetal, inertial, counterspatial. Magnetism displaces dielectricity. What we're getting is magnetic displacement of dielectricity here. But that is the centrifugal divergent magnetism displacing dielectricity. Yes, the cathode ray tube is a great demonstration model. So, now we know why we have a bright spot here and a huge black spot here. Magnetism, centrifugal magnetism along the edge of this magnet is displacing the dielectric lines of force, as is necessitated, as is the conjugate nature of magnetodielectricity. Why are we getting the bright white spot here? Because this is the centripetal point of fastest access of dielectric field pressure mediation along lowest pressure gradients. Centripetal here. The same reason we are getting an egg-shaped pattern here. You notice the larger protuberance over here, and the smaller protuberance over here. If I flip it around, I'll get the inverse due to inverse. This is how a magnet works centrifugally, okay? Like this, okay? You understand? So, now we have to answer the question, why do we have a protuberance on one side and concentration over here on this side? The answer is simple once again. Platonic retroductive simplex methodology explains everything. If you know the conjugate nature of magnetism and dielectricity, how they displace each other, how they interact with each other, explaining this is child's play. This is the point of lowest pressure mediation for dielectric displacement and dielectric attraction. We have our dielectric inertial plane along the midpoint of the magnet here, because dielectricity wants to come to the inertial plane of the magnet here, but this is centrifugal magnetism all along the rim here, so it's being displaced here, just like squeezing a balloon animal balloon. You squeeze, you pinch it on one end, the other side gets large. You pinch it on the other end, and the other side gets large. Same principle with ether modalities, of which there are four: gravity, mass, electricity, which is dielectricity and magnetism working together to create electrification, dielectricity and magnetism. Two co-principles of the universe, dielectricity and magnetism. The two hybrid principles, mass, gravity, and electricity. Phi times psi equals Q of electrification and Planck. Okay, so great. Now here's our bright spot at the center. Why do we have concentric rings? Displacement, convergence. Displacement, we have a lot of lines of dielectric force being discharged in the back of the CRT tube. You notice we're getting counterclockwise movement on our grid, and here we're getting clockwise movement. Now since we're getting clockwise twist movement here, you'll notice in here we have counterclockwise movement on our centripetal. This is why we have a bright white spot at the center here. I can do the same thing over here. The reason I'm getting more displacement is because the quote-unquote electron guns, which is not what is happening, dielectric lines of force. You can call them electrons if you want. That's fine. People have been doing that now for 80 years. But it's nothing but rehashed Greek atomism. There's no such thing as a discharged particle. It is an absurdity. There is no such thing as a negative charge. There's only discharge. Electricity is being fed through a system of transformers and boards in the back. Lines of dielectricity are being discharged. There's magnetic director coils in the back of that CRT tube after you leave the dielectric lines of force, or the quote-unquote electron gun. So you want to call them electrons, fine, but that's not what they are. They're dielectric lines of force. Dielectricity is displaced by magnetism. This is why there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Not based upon this, but based upon logic. Everything that Heaviside said, Tesla said, C.P. Steinmetz said, Oliver Heaviside said, Faraday said, James Clerk Maxwell. This isn't a harebrained premise. These are the people that are powering everything that you are using today. They gave you that. Maxwell, Tesla, Steinmetz, Heaviside. This is why at the end of his life, Oliver Heaviside went insane, because everybody started believing in the atomism of relativity. There are no electrons discharging in the back of the CRT tube. So now, why do we have an egg shape here, an inverse egg shape on this side? Inverse spin, obviously, but where's the egg shape coming from? Pressure mediation, dielectricity here. Dielectric inertial plane along the midpoint of the quote-unquote magnet, which is not a magnet, is a very powerful dielectric object, which I actually shouldn't be having this next to my watch. It'll probably ruin it. But anyway, we have countervoidance here. I have voidance here, dielectric voidance. Dielectricity is being shot out of the back of the CRT tube. This is the point, just like squeezing a balloon. You have constrictor here, but it's just inverse. What you have is magnetic displacement of the dielectricity in the CRT tube. So when you think of dielectric countervoidance, or what you incorrectly call repulsion, we have the inverse. So in repulsion, rather than squeezing, we have a displacement. Here we have dielectric displacement, and of course we have dielectricity attracted to, or in voidance at, the dielectric inertial plane of the magnet. Now, let's go to the confusion of some idiots have had that a magnet has 4 poles. Now, if you look at this, people would think, and there's an old guy, he's dead now, he actually came up with the idea that the magnet actually has 4 poles. Well, it doesn't. It came from this insane premise. You see here, let's explain this very simply. You see 4 protuberances, right? You notice a very bright white ring right here where you're still getting magnetic displacement. But all you have to do is look at it sideways. You have 4 points of attraction if I put the magnet like this, or dielectric voidance. Remember, dielectricity is being shot out of the back of the CRT tube. Here are our 4 points of dielectric voidance, or what you'd call attraction, correct? Here are centrifugal points of our magnetism. Here, 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 here. So, logical, explainable, simplex. In line with what Heaviside, Steinmetz, Maxwell, they all said, we know the conjugate nature of magnetism and dielectricity. Magnetism is a discharge of dielectricity. That's where they called it the dielectric field. Okay? This is not 4 poles. You're looking at the exact same thing, but what you're now looking at that is different from this is that we have 4 points of dielectric voidance. Here, here, as we know from a centripetal point, dielectric voidance, to see the bright spot in the center. So all we've done is turn it this way. So now we have 4 points of dielectric voidance. Centripetally on this side, centripetally on this side, and along the dielectric inertial plane here, and along the dielectric inertial plane here. Oh, simplex, logical, explainable, divinely simple. Wow. This is what happens when you study Platonism and translate Greek for years and years and years and years and years. You learn to think simply, logically. You don't believe in BS and nonsense and atomistic uniform particles like virtual muons and gluons, and it's just ridiculous absurdity. Nature does not do math. There are only 4 ether modalities in the universe. We know how magnetism interacts with dielectricity. We know how dielectricity interacts with magnetism. We know that dielectricity comes into avoidance. Did I actually stop my watch? No, I thought the magnet ruined my watch there for a minute. So, here you see our centrifugal field. Let's switch over to another field view. Okay? Same thing, just looking at something different. So, this is easier to see this way. Here you see our magnetic divergence, or centrifugal. We see our centripetal, our convergence, same here. I'm holding the magnet top to bottom. Here you see magnetic flux lines. Of course, they're concentrated here because this is the dielectric inertial plane. Reciprocating convergently, reintegrating convergently to the other side. As you'll notice, our egg pattern shifts over this way. Remember, this is just like squeezing a balloon. This is exactly what you're seeing in this egg-shaped pattern. Whether it's this way or this way, what you're seeing is the squeezing of a balloon, except you're squeezing 2 different ether modalities that move away from each other. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. There's only such a thing as dielectric avoidance. See the bright white spot in the center? Dielectricity goes to dielectricity. Magnetism is radiation. Radiation has never attracted anything. It displaces things. It does not attract anything. What happens in magnetic attraction? is interatomic magnetodielectric coherency of the dielectricity within the interatomic of the ferrous object. Acceleration. I bring this magnet towards a ferrous object with incoherent dielectricity. Magnetism displaces. Acceleration. Simple. Magnetic induction. People use the word magnetic induction, they think of magnetic attraction, and it is age old as the sun rising in the east, but there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. But as I told you in another video, don't tell this to other people or they'll think you're crazy. They'll ask about your medication or they'll wonder what the punchline is. So, let's look at our quote-unquote 4 poles here. Now that we have a rational, logical explanation for what's going on, we know there aren't 2 poles here. What we have are 4 points of dielectric voidance, or what you'd call attraction. So let's look at what they are. Remember, this is our inertial plane of our magnet. Here, here. So here we have the point of dielectric convergence. Dielectric avoidance. And centripetally along either pole, here and here. Here we have our centrifugal magnetism displacing the dielectricity. 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is where the error of 4 poles in a magnet came from. It's still perpetrated today. It's nonsense. It's just a misunderstanding of this conjugate magnetodielectric object that we call a magnet. Here I'm looking at only, yes, only 2 points. Well, really there's 3. This isn't very apparent because we have a centrifugal magnetism displacing the dielectricity being emitted from the CRT tube. Here we have dielectric convergence, avoidance, and along the small end of the quote-unquote egg formation here, right over here. But here we can see it very easily because we've now laid the dielectric inertial plane along the lowest pressure point of dielectric avoidance. Now we have 4 very apparent entry points, or avoidance points, for dielectricity being emitted from the back of the CRT tube. Here, 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 and here, and here you'll see magnetic displacement of the dielectricity here, which is just the 4 sections of either corner. Remember, you look at it this way, you got 4 corners, right? 4 corners of magnetic displacement. Logical, simplex, reasonable, rational, explains all observed phenomena. No, they're not electrons being emitted from the back of this thing. It's called an electron gun. What they are is snapping dielectric lines of force. You can call them electrons if you want. I can call a horse a unicorn if I want. I can glue a paper horn on it and call it a unicorn. That doesn't make it something different. It is a horse. This is what Charles Proteus Steinmetz, Heaviside, and Tesla and Maxwell railed against, is the notion that there is a discharged particle. There is not. This is a dielectric vacuum tube snapping dielectric lines of force that you incorrectly deem to be little rolling, tiny, massless beads rolling into space as discharge. No such thing as an electron. Kiss my fanny. Pardon my language. Anyway, so now we know what we're seeing. Now you know the formations we're getting. Now we have logical explanation. Yes, I'm using the CRT tube as a demonstration. Is it my only demonstration model? Absolutely not. I have lots and lots of others. But it is a wonderful demonstration model, especially for videos. Why are we getting this spot? We know magnetism displaces dielectricity. So now we know there's dielectricity being emitted from the back of the CRT tube. Why do we have a bright spot here in the center? Wow, that's the centripetal point right there for dielectric voidance. Oh, that's right. That's what you've been saying for so long in your book and saying before. That's right. That's why we have displacement here, or repulsion here, and we have attraction here. Same thing goes for here. Look, magnetic displacement, but very close to the magnet here because we have, just like squeezing a balloon, pressure mediation. 2 ether modalities, dielectricity and dielectricity in discharge, aka magnetism. That is what magnetism is. It is the discharge. It is the horse poop from the horse. What is driving this is not the horse poop, folks, for lack of a better analogy. It is the horse. What is powering what you call magnetism is dielectricity. That's right. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Everything is mediated. Now what is reaching out into space, obviously, is magnetism. And what that causes is dielectric coherency and acceleration of the ferrous object towards the quote-unquote magnet. So, now we understand our bright spot. Now we understand this egg shape. Now we know why when we flip it over, it's on the other side, inverse spin, because we can see from our grid, one side we're getting a rotation counterclockwise, but if we look here, you'll see we have a clockwise formation. Flip it over, here you see we have counterclockwise twist of our grid, but look in the center, we see a clockwise twist on our grid, but here in the center we see we have a counterclockwise formation at the centripetal point of convergence. Counterclockwise, look in the center, clockwise. Yes, it's a CRT tube, but it's a great demonstration tool. Why? Because this is a quote-unquote magnet, and right now I'm shooting out tons and tons of dielectric lines of force from the back of the CRT tube. And since this is emitting macromagnetism at a great power due to it being electrified from a cap bank to discharging coils, quote-unquote magnetization, what is happening is dielectric capacitance in these. Now I can obviously cause magnetic induction and create a soft magnet by stroking this magnet along an iron bar. That's the same thing, but there's no increase in dielectric capacitance in doing that. So, here we're getting magnetic displacement. But, hate to be redundant, bright spot in center? Yes, that's right. That's really bright white because that's the point of dielectric voidance, or what you would call attraction, but it's not attraction and magnetism. That is dielectricity meeting the centripetal point of convergence, dielectricity to dielectricity. What folds a magnet is not magnetism. Pole reaching other poles, you break a magnet, is dielectric voidance. What gives massiveness to the entire universe is magnetism. Everything that has massiveness in matter and mass has to do solely with magnetism. And magnetism is the discharge of dielectricity, the fundamental principle of all four ether modalities, including itself. Understood? Make things simple, easy, understandable.